The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Alder as Major General Maria Reyes stepped through the glass doors of the main administrative building. Her standard utility uniform bore no visible rank insignia, the fabric crisp but unremarkable among the sea of military personnel beginning their daily routines. She carried a manila folder against her chest, its contents hidden from view as she approached the reception desk, where Specialist Morrison sat typing on his computer. Morrison glanced up briefly, his eyes taking in her civilian-like appearance before returning to his screen. The morning formation had just concluded outside, and the building buzzed with the energy of soldiers beginning their workday. Reyes waited patiently at the counter, watching as Morrison finished his email before acknowledging her presence. "Excuse me," Morrison said without looking up again. "Visitor services is in Building C across the parking lot. You'll need to check in there first before accessing any base facilities." Reyes smiled politely, her voice calm and measured. "I'm not a visitor. I need to complete in-processing for the installation commander position." Morrison's fingers paused over his keyboard, and he looked up with barely concealed amusement. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion. The commander's office handles military personnel only. If you're here for a contracting position, you'll need to go through civilian personnel services." The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated Reyes' patient expression as she shifted the folder to her other arm. "I understand the process, Specialist Morrison," she said, reading his name tag with deliberate precision. "I need access to the command suite for official in-processing procedures." From across the reception area, Corporal Jenkins looked up from his filing cabinet, his eyebrows raised with interest. He walked over to the counter, his boots clicking against the polished floor as he approached the conversation. "Is there a problem here, Morrison?" Jenkins asked, his tone carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to managing civilian contractors who occasionally wandered into the wrong building. "Just a misunderstanding," Morrison replied, turning back to Reyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and your visitor badge before I can help you any further." Reyes reached into her pocket, extracting her military identification card and placing it on the counter. Morrison picked it up, examining it with growing confusion as his eyes moved from the photo to the rank designation and back to her face. "This says you're military," Morrison said slowly, "but there must be some mistake with the rank coding. The system probably generated an error when they made your dependent ID." Jenkins leaned over to examine the card, his expression shifting from casual interest to bewilderment. "That's not a dependent ID, Morrison. That's an active duty card." The two specialists exchanged glances, their confidence wavering as they processed the information before them. Reyes remained perfectly still, her military bearing evident in the way she held her shoulders and maintained eye contact. "I've been telling folks who watch from military bases to share where they're stationed in the comments. It's fascinating how different installations handle these kinds of situations, and I'm curious where you all are experiencing this from." Security guard Davis approached from his position near the entrance, drawn by the unusual conversation taking place at the front desk. His radio crackled softly as he adjusted his equipment belt and studied the scene with professional interest. "What's the situation here?" Davis asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone responsible for building security protocols. "This lady claims she's here for commander in processing," Jenkins explained, gesturing toward Reyes with uncertainty. "But she doesn't look like any officer I've ever seen." Davis examined Reyes from head to toe, taking in her unremarkable appearance and modest demeanor. His years of experience dealing with confused visitors and lost personnel colored his assessment of the situation. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right building?" Davis asked, his tone patronizing despite his attempt at professionalism. "The commissary is about a mile down the road, and the family services building is in the housing area." Reyes' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of her growing frustration with the repeated misdirection. She maintained her composure, years of military discipline evident in her controlled response. "I am exactly where I need to be," she said firmly. "I require access to the command suite to complete official in-processing procedures for assumption of command." Morrison shook his head with the confidence of someone who believed he understood military protocol better than the person standing before him. "Ma'am, the base commander is a full colonel. There's no way the army would send someone who looks like you to take over an installation this size. The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Jenkins nodded in agreement, emboldened by his colleague's assessment of the situation. The morning bustle around them continued, but the tension at the reception desk had begun to draw curious glances from passing personnel. "You might want to check with mental health services," Jenkins suggested with false concern. "Sometimes people get confused about their role on base, especially if they're dealing with stress or adjustment issues." Reyes' folder remained clutched against her chest, its official seals and markings hidden from view as she processed the escalating disrespect with remarkable patience. Her training had prepared her for many challenges of command, but this particular obstacle required a different kind of strategic thinking. The three men stood before her like an informal tribunal, their assumptions solidified into an impenetrable barrier of institutional bias. Davis crossed his arms. Morrison returned his attention to his computer, and Jenkins began organizing papers with dismissive efficiency. "I suggest you gentlemen reconsider your approach," Reyes said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone of authority that none of them recognized. "Your behavior will be documented and reviewed by appropriate leadership." Morrison laughed outright, the sound echoing through the reception area and drawing more attention from nearby personnel. "Lady, you can document whatever you want, but you're not getting past this desk without proper authorization and escort." The morning sun continued its climb outside the windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the administrative building as the confrontation reached its first crescendo. Reyes stood perfectly still, her military bearing unwavering despite the disrespect surrounding her. "In 15 minutes, she said with quiet certainty, "senior leadership will arrive for the change of command ceremony. I recommend you use that time to reconsider your current approach to this situation." Davis chuckled and shook his head, convinced he was dealing with someone who had lost touch with reality. The morning formation was over, the building was functioning normally, and nothing in his experience suggested that anything unusual was about to occur. The calm before the storm settled over Fort Alder's administrative building as Reyes waited with the patience of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed across the polished floor as Specialist Tanner emerged from the back office, his morning coffee steaming in a ceramic mug that bore the installation's unit crest. He surveyed the scene at the reception desk with immediate interest, his eyes moving from Morrison's amused expression to Davis's crossed arms before settling on Reyes with undisguised curiosity. "What's all the excitement about?" Tanner asked, setting his coffee down on the counter with deliberate casualness. Morrison gestured toward Reyes with barely concealed satisfaction, eager to share the morning's entertainment with his colleague. "We've got ourselves a lost contractor lady who thinks she's here to take over the base," Morrison explained, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby personnel could hear the joke. "She's been standing there for 10 minutes insisting she needs command suite access." Tanner's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise as he studied Reyes with theatrical interest. His morning routine had prepared him for the usual administrative tasks, not for this unexpected source of amusement that had apparently wandered into their building. "No kidding," Tanner said with exaggerated concern. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right today? Sometimes the stress of base housing or family separation can cause people to become confused about their role here." Reyes shifted her weight slightly, her patience wearing thin as the harassment took on a more condescending tone. She glanced at her watch, noting that the change of command ceremony was scheduled to begin in precisely 45 minutes. "I am here for official business," she said clearly. "There is a change of command ceremony scheduled for 0900 hours, and I require access to complete my in-processing procedures beforehand." Tanner burst into laughter, the sound sharp and mocking in the administrative building's professional atmosphere. He looked at Morrison and Davis as if sharing an inside joke, his amusement growing with each passing second. "A change of command ceremony," Tanner repeated, wiping imaginary tears from his eyes. "Lady, there's no ceremony today. Trust me, we'd know if something that important was happening on our installation." The morning light continued streaming through the windows, illuminating the growing tension as more personnel began to notice the unusual confrontation taking place at the front desk. Several soldiers slowed their pace as they passed, drawn by the raised voices and obvious conflict. Perhaps you should check with the mental health clinic, Tanner continued, his tone shifting from amusement to false concern. They have excellent counselors who specialize in helping people who might be experiencing some confusion about reality. Reyes' jaw clenched almost imperceptibly, her military training the only thing preventing her from addressing this disrespect with the full authority of her position. She took a measured breath, choosing her words carefully as the situation continued to deteriorate. I need to speak with your senior non-commissioned officer or the duty officer immediately, she said firmly. This situation requires immediate attention from competent leadership. Davis shook his head with the confidence of someone who believed he understood base security better than anyone present. All our leadership is way too busy to deal with contractor problems, especially ones involving people who might need medical attention. Tanner moved from behind the counter, positioning himself between Reyes and the hallway that led to the command offices. His body language became more aggressive, his casual morning demeanor replaced by something approaching hostility. You're not going anywhere near the command suite, Tanner declared, crossing his arms in a mirror of Davis's stance. We have protocols here, and wandering contractors don't get access to restricted areas just because they're having some kind of episode. More personnel had begun gathering in the reception area, drawn by the escalating confrontation and the unusual sight of 3 military men surrounding a single woman. The morning's routine had been disrupted by this unexpected drama, and curious glances were exchanged among the growing crowd. Corporal Ricks appeared from the stairwell, his boots announcing his presence as he descended to the main floor. He took in the scene with immediate interest, his eyes moving from the gathered crowd to the central figures of the confrontation. What's going on down here? Ricks asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. The noise level was getting loud enough to disrupt work throughout the building. We've got a situation with someone who thinks she's supposed to take over the base, Tanner explained, gesturing toward Reyes with obvious disdain. She's been demanding access to command areas and claiming there's some kind of ceremony today. Ricks studied Reyes with the calculating gaze of someone evaluating a potential security threat. His years of experience had taught him to be suspicious of anyone who didn't fit the normal patterns of base personnel. Ma'am, you need to understand that we take security very seriously here, Ricks said, his tone patronizing and dismissive. If you're having some kind of personal crisis, we can get you connected with the appropriate resources. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and several of the gathered personnel shifted uncomfortably as they witnessed the increasingly hostile treatment. Reyes remained perfectly still, her military bearing evident despite the harassment surrounding her. I am documenting the names and behavior of every individual involved in this incident, she said quietly, her voice carrying an undertone of authority that none of them recognized. Your conduct will be reviewed by appropriate leadership. Morrison laughed from behind the counter, emboldened by the support of his colleagues. You can document whatever you want, lady, but the only thing being reviewed today will be your mental health evaluation. Tanner stepped closer, his position now clearly threatening as he blocked any potential movement toward the command hallway. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, some personnel appearing genuinely concerned about the escalating harassment they were witnessing. Let's see this fake identification you've been flashing around, Tanner demanded, extending his hand toward the folder Reyes held against her chest. I bet it's some kind of novelty item you bought online, or something equally ridiculous. Reyes pulled the folder closer to her body, protecting its classified contents from unauthorized access. Her movement was subtle but deliberate, the action of someone trained to protect sensitive information under pressure. You do not have authorization to examine these documents, she said firmly. They contain information that requires appropriate security clearance and official channels for review. Davis shook his head with exaggerated disbelief, convinced that her reluctance to share the folder proved his assessment of the situation. If those documents were legitimate, you'd have no problem showing them to base security personnel. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting different shadows through the administrative building as the confrontation reached a new level of intensity. Ricks moved to flank Reyes from the other side, creating a more intimidating physical presence. We're trying to help you here, Ricks said with false patience. But if you continue refusing to cooperate with security protocols, We're going to have to escalate this situation to law enforcement." The threat hung in the air like a challenge, and Tanner nodded enthusiastically at his colleague's suggestion. Several personnel in the growing crowd exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing that the harassment had crossed professional boundaries. "You have 30 seconds to produce proper identification and explain your business here," Tanner announced with theatrical authority. "After that, we're calling the military police to remove you from this facility." Reyes remained motionless, her folder pressed securely against her chest as she processed the escalating threats with remarkable composure. Her watch showed 37 minutes until the change of command ceremony, and she could hear the distant sound of vehicles arriving in the parking lot outside. Tanner's patience reached its breaking point as he stepped closer to Reyes, his eyes fixed on the manila folder she held protectively against her chest. The morning's entertainment had transformed into something more serious, and his casual amusement had been replaced by aggressive determination to resolve the situation on his own terms. "I'm done playing games," Tanner announced loudly, ensuring the gathered crowd could witness his decisive action. "Give me that folder right now so I can see what kind of fake documents you're carrying around." He extended his hand toward the folder with the confidence of someone who believed he had absolute authority in the situation. Reyes stepped backward slightly, maintaining her grip on the classified materials while keeping her eyes locked on Tanner's face. "You do not have authorization to examine these documents," she repeated firmly. "They contain classified information that requires appropriate security clearance for review." Tanner's expression darkened with frustration as he interpreted her refusal as confirmation of his suspicions. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with personnel from multiple offices drawn by the escalating confrontation taking place in their building's main reception area. "That's exactly what someone with fake documents would say," Tanner declared, reaching forward suddenly to grab the folder from her hands. "If those papers were legitimate, you wouldn't be afraid to show them to base security personnel." The physical contact broke the professional boundary that had barely contained the situation until this moment. Reyes instinctively pulled the folder closer to her body, her military training kicking in to protect classified materials from unauthorized access. "Remove your hands from military property immediately," she ordered, her voice carrying a tone of command authority that cut through the morning chaos like a blade. "You are committing a serious breach of security protocol." But Tanner had committed to his course of action, and the presence of witnesses only strengthened his resolve to demonstrate his control over the situation. He grasped the edge of the folder more firmly, beginning a brief struggle that sent shockwaves through the gathered personnel. Corporal Ricks moved quickly to support his colleague, positioning himself to block Reyes from any potential retreat toward the command hallway. His bulky frame created an intimidating presence as he joined the physical interference with her movement. "You're not going anywhere until we sort this out," Ricks declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "We have protocols here, and you're going to follow them whether you like it or not." The struggle over the folder intensified as Tanner applied more pressure, his determination to examine the contents overriding any consideration for proper procedures. The manila envelope began to bend under the stress of opposing forces pulling in different directions. During the brief physical altercation, the folder's metal clasp came loose, allowing the top portion to fall open slightly. Several sheets of official letterhead became partially visible, displaying the distinctive formatting and seals that marked genuine Department of Army correspondence. Morrison leaned over the counter to get a better view of the exposed documents, his eyes widening as he caught sight of official markings that looked far more authentic than he had expected. The letterhead bore formatting that matched genuine military correspondence, complete with security classifications and distribution restrictions. "Those still look fake to me," Morrison announced quickly, his voice betraying uncertainty that hadn't been present moments earlier. "Anyone can print official-looking documents on a home computer these days." Several personnel in the gathered crowd exchanged uncertain glances as they caught glimpses of what appeared to be legitimate government documentation. The mood in the reception area began to shift as doubt crept into the previously confident assessment of the situation. Tanner maintained his grip on the folder despite the evidence before his eyes, his commitment to his initial judgment preventing him from acknowledging what he was seeing. The documents clearly bore authentic security markings and classification stamps that would be nearly impossible to replicate. "I don't care how official these look," Tanner insisted, his voice rising to compensate for his diminishing confidence. "People fake this kind of stuff all the time, especially when they're having some kind of mental health episode." Rick stepped closer, creating additional physical pressure as he attempted to intimidate Reyes into surrendering the documents. His position blocked her access to the command hallway while supporting Tanner's increasingly aggressive behavior. "You need to let go of those papers and come with us for a psychological evaluation," Rix demanded, his tone combining false concern with obvious threats. This kind of delusional behavior requires professional intervention. Reyes maintained her grip on the folder while processing the escalating assault with remarkable composure. Her military training had prepared her for hostile situations, but the irony of being attacked by her own personnel added a surreal quality to the confrontation. "You are physically assaulting a commissioned officer of the United States Army," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the reception area to ensure all witnesses could hear her words. "Your actions constitute serious violations of military law and regulations." The formal language and precise military terminology caused several onlookers to reconsider their assessment of the situation. Her bearing and speech patterns suggested genuine military experience rather than the civilian confusion they had initially assumed. Morrison reached for his telephone, dialing the base security emergency number with the confidence of someone who believed he was preventing a serious incident. His call would summon additional personnel to deal with what he still considered a trespassing situation. "Base security, this is the admin building," Morrison announced into the receiver. "We need assistance removing a trespassing contractor who's become combative and is claiming to be military personnel." The radio call sent ripples of tension through the growing crowd as the situation escalated beyond verbal harassment into an official security incident. Several personnel shifted uncomfortably, beginning to question whether they were witnessing something far more serious than initially apparent. Davis moved to support the physical confrontation, creating a triangle of aggressive men surrounding Reyes as she protected her classified documents. The morning's routine had been completely disrupted by this unprecedented situation that none of them fully understood. "Final warning," Reyes announced, her voice cutting through the chaos with unmistakable authority. "Release military property immediately and step away from a commissioned officer, or face the full consequences of your actions under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Her use of specific military legal terminology caused additional doubt among the witnesses, many of whom recognized the formal language used in official proceedings. The confident manner in which she cited regulations suggested knowledge that went far beyond civilian understanding. Tanner's grip on the folder faltered momentarily as uncertainty crept into his aggressive stance. The documents he could see appeared increasingly authentic, and her unwavering confidence in the face of physical harassment suggested possibilities he hadn't considered. The sound of approaching vehicles in the parking lot began to filter through the building's windows, accompanied by the distinctive rumble of military transport that suggested official business was about to commence. Radio chatter from various offices indicated increased activity throughout the installation. "Those are probably just more contractors arriving for some construction project," Morrison announced, but his voice lacked the confidence that had characterized his earlier assessments. The timing of the arrivals coincided too closely with her predictions for pure coincidence. Reyes straightened her uniform with her free hand, smoothing the fabric and adjusting her posture into the formal military bearing appropriate for official proceedings. Her transformation was subtle but unmistakable, as her civilian appearance gave way to something that suggested command presence. "Gentlemen," she said with quiet certainty, "you have approximately 3 minutes to reconsider your current course of action. Senior leadership is arriving for scheduled proceedings, and your behavior will be evaluated accordingly." The morning sun had climbed high enough to illuminate the reception area with harsh clarity, casting sharp shadows that emphasized the growing tension between the confrontational personnel and their increasingly uncertain target. Radio traffic continued to increase from multiple offices throughout the building. The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot echoed through the windows, followed by the measured pace of multiple personnel approaching the administrative building. The rhythmic cadence suggested military personnel moving with purpose rather than casual arrivals. Rick's glanced toward the entrance nervously, his confidence beginning to waver as external events aligned with Reyes' predictions in ways that suggested knowledge rather than delusion. The timing was becoming too precise to dismiss as coincidence or wishful thinking. The glass doors of the administrative building swung open with military precision as Command Sergeant Major Rodriguez stepped inside, his polished boots clicking against the polished floor with the measured cadence of 28 years of service. His dress uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and decoration positioned with the exactness that marked senior enlisted leadership. Rodriguez surveyed the scene before him with experienced eyes, taking in the crowd of personnel gathered around the reception desk and the obvious tension that filled the morning air. His gaze moved past the surprised faces of Morrison and Tanner before settling on Reyes with immediate recognition. "Good morning, General," Rodriguez announced in a voice that carried across the entire reception area, his right hand snapping to his forehead in a crisp military salute. The formality of his greeting cut through the chaos like a thunderclap, freezing every person in the building with its unexpected authority. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Tanner's grip on the folder went completely slack as his jaw dropped open in shock. Morrison's confident expression crumbled into confusion and growing horror as he processed what he had just witnessed. Davis stepped backward involuntarily, his security guard authority evaporating in the face of senior military protocol. Reyes returned the salute with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to formal military courtesy, her bearing transforming completely as she acknowledged Rodriguez's greeting. The subtle change in her posture revealed the command presence that had been hidden beneath her patient endurance of the morning's harassment. "Good morning, Sergeant Major," she replied, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command authority that had been carefully controlled during the previous confrontation. "I trust the ceremony preparations are proceeding on schedule." Rodriguez's eyes swept the gathered crowd with the calculating assessment of someone trained to evaluate military discipline and professional behavior. His expression darkened as he took in the obvious signs of confrontation and the defensive positioning of the administrative staff around Reyes. The sound of additional vehicles arriving echoed through the building as Colonel Harris emerged from a black sedan, his dress blue uniform bearing the insignia of the outgoing installation commander. His approach toward the building carried the purposeful stride of someone arriving for official business. Harris entered the administrative building with the bearing of a career officer accustomed to formal proceedings, his eyes immediately finding Rodriguez and Reyes among the gathered personnel. His salute was equally crisp and formal, acknowledging her presence with the respect due to superior rank. "General Reyes," Harris announced clearly, his voice ensuring that every person in the reception area could hear the formal recognition. "Welcome to Fort Alder. I trust your transition preparations have been proceeding smoothly." The second formal acknowledgement of her rank and position sent shockwaves through the administrative staff, who stood frozen in various positions around the reception desk like actors trapped in a tableau of their own making. Ricks had gone pale, his aggressive stance replaced by obvious panic as he realized the magnitude of his error. Morrison attempted to speak, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he struggled to process the reality unfolding before him. The confident specialist who had dismissed her as a confused contractor now faced the truth that he had spent the morning mocking and obstructing his new installation commander. Tanner released the folder completely, stepping backward with hands raised as if the classified documents had suddenly become radioactive. His theatrical demands to examine fake papers now seemed like acts of military suicide, and his face had drained of all color. "Colonel Harris, allow me to introduce Major General Maria Reyes, your incoming installation commander," Rodriguez announced formally, his voice carrying to every corner of the reception area. "The change of command ceremony will commence in 35 minutes, as scheduled." The formal introduction hit the administrative staff like a physical blow, confirming their worst fears about the morning's events. Davis sank into a nearby chair, his security authority revealed as completely meaningless in the face of actual military hierarchy and protocol. Rodriguez's experienced eyes moved systematically around the reception area, noting the defensive positions of the administrative staff and the obvious signs that some kind of confrontation had taken place. His expression grew increasingly stern as he processed the implications of what he was observing. "General," Rodriguez said carefully, "I trust there haven't been any issues with your arrival or in-processing procedures. The staff here has a reputation for professionalism and military courtesy." Reyes maintained her formal bearing while glancing meaningfully at each of the personnel who had participated in the morning's harassment. Her eyes moved from Morrison to Tanner to Ricks to Davis, documenting their positions and reactions with the precision of someone trained in military leadership assessment. "There have been some interesting interactions, Sergeant Major," she replied diplomatically, her voice carrying undertones that promised detailed discussion of the morning's events. "I believe several personnel here may benefit from additional training in proper military protocol and respect for the chain of command." Morrison finally found his voice, stammering as he attempted to salvage a situation that had already spiraled completely beyond his control. "General, I'm sorry. There was a misunderstanding about your identification and purpose here. We thought you were a contractor who had become confused." Colonel Harris studied Morrison's panicked expression with the calculating gaze of someone experienced in evaluating military discipline failures. The outgoing commander's responsibility for unit standards made him keenly interested in any breakdown of proper protocol. "Specialist Morrison," Harris said slowly, "are you telling me that you failed to properly identify and assist the incoming installation commander during her official in-processing procedures?" The formal tone of the question left no doubt about the seriousness of Morrison's situation. Tanner shifted nervously beside him, realizing that his own participation in the morning's events would be equally scrutinized by leadership who took military courtesy and respect for rank seriously. Rodriguez retrieved the folder that Tanner had dropped, handling the classified materials with the proper security procedures that the administrative staff had completely ignored. His examination of the partially exposed documents confirmed the authenticity that should have been obvious to trained military personnel. "These are official change of command orders bearing appropriate classification markings and security protocols," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the reception area to ensure all witnesses understood the gravity of the situation they had created. General Reyes opened the folder properly, revealing the complete department of Army letterhead and official seals that marked genuine military correspondence. The documents bore her photograph, complete service record, and the formal orders transferring her to command of the installation. Ricks attempted to explain his position, his voice cracking under the pressure of addressing officers whose authority he had spent the morning undermining. General, we were just following security protocols for unidentified personnel in the building." Rodriguez's expression hardened as he processed Rick's explanation, recognizing the obvious flaws in logic that had led to such a catastrophic failure of military judgment and protocol. Security procedures were designed to identify legitimate personnel, not to harass commanding officers. "Corporal Ricks," Rodriguez said with dangerous calm, "are you suggesting that proper security protocols include physically restraining commissioned officers and demanding unauthorized access to classified documentation?" The question hung in the air like an indictment, and Ricks realized that his attempts at justification only served to highlight additional violations of military law and regulation. Davis remained silent in his chair, understanding that his participation in the harassment had been equally inappropriate. Harris consulted his watch and nodded to Rodriguez, indicating that the formal ceremony needed to commence soon to maintain the scheduled timeline. The gathering crowd of personnel would need to be dismissed so that proper military proceedings could take place. "Sergeant Major, please document the names and actions of all personnel involved in this incident," Harris ordered formally. "General Reyes will need complete information for her initial command assessment and any subsequent disciplinary proceedings." Rodriguez produced a small notebook and began recording information with the methodical precision of someone experienced in documenting military discipline issues. His questions to witnesses ensured that every detail of the morning's harassment would be preserved for official review. Morrison made one final attempt to minimize the severity of his actions, his voice pleading as he addressed the senior leadership who now controlled his military future. "Sir, We really thought she was having some kind of episode. Her appearance didn't match what we expected from a general officer. The explanation only served to highlight the prejudicial assumptions that had driven the morning's harassment, and Harris's expression darkened as he processed the implications of Morrison's words. Military leadership came in many forms, and professional judgment required looking beyond superficial appearances. Specialist Morrison, Harris replied coldly, "Your expectations about general officer appearance are irrelevant to your duty to treat all personnel with appropriate military courtesy and respect. Your failure reflects serious gaps in your professional development." The formal rebuke echoed through the reception area, serving notice to all present that the morning's events would have lasting consequences for those who had participated in the harassment. Rodriguez continued his documentation while other personnel began arriving for the change of command ceremony. General Reyes maintained her professional demeanor throughout the proceedings, her experience as a senior officer evident in her handling of a situation that had tested her patience and composure. The morning's harassment had revealed important information about unit culture and leadership challenges. The administrative building buzzed with increased activity as word of the morning's events spread throughout the installation. Personnel arriving for the ceremony glanced curiously at the subdued staff members who stood around the reception area in obvious distress. Colonel Harris gestured toward the command suite, indicating that it was time for the formal proceedings to begin. The change of command ceremony would proceed as scheduled, but the morning's events had already established important precedents for General Reyes's upcoming tenure as installation commander. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony, General?" Harris asked formally, his tone indicating that the administrative staff's failures would not be allowed to disrupt official military business. The installation's mission required continuity of command regardless of personnel discipline issues. Rodriguez closed his notebook and secured it in his uniform pocket, the documentation complete for subsequent review and action. His stern expression promised that the morning's lessons in military courtesy would be reinforced through appropriate channels and procedures. Command Sergeant Major Rodriguez closed his notebook with deliberate precision, the documentation complete and the gravity of the situation demanding immediate action. His 28 years of service had taught him that leadership failures required swift correction to prevent erosion of military discipline and respect for authority. Specialist Tanner, Corporal Ricks, Rodriguez announced in a voice that carried absolute authority throughout the reception area. "You are immediately relieved of duty pending investigation into your conduct toward a commissioned officer of the United States Army." The formal words hit Tanner like physical blows, his face draining of all remaining color as he realized the magnitude of his situation. Military law regarding assault on officers was clear and unforgiving, and his theatrical demands to examine classified documents now appeared as serious violations of multiple regulations. Ricks attempted to speak, his mouth opening to offer some explanation or justification for his actions, but Rodriguez's raised hand silenced him before any words could emerge. The command sergeant major's expression brooked no argument or discussion about the immediate consequences of their behavior. "You will report to your first sergeants within the hour for formal counseling and initiation of disciplinary proceedings," Rodriguez continued, his tone ensuring that every witness understood the seriousness of military justice when properly applied. "Your actions this morning constitute multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Morrison stood behind the reception desk like a statue, his confident morning demeanor completely shattered by the realization that he had spent an hour mocking and obstructing his new installation commander. His attempts at damage control had only served to highlight additional failures in judgment and military courtesy. "Specialist Morrison," Colonel Harris addressed him directly, his voice carrying the weight of command authority that Morrison had failed to recognize earlier. "You will be removed from all duties involving personnel interaction pending completion of extensive retraining in military protocol and respect for rank." The administrative consequences began cascading through the building as word spread about the morning's events and their aftermath. Personnel who had witnessed the harassment exchanged nervous glances, understanding that professional military standards were being enforced with absolute seriousness. Security guard Davis remained seated in his chair, his civilian status providing no protection from the consequences of his participation in the harassment of a general officer. His years of base security experience had apparently taught him nothing about properly identifying and respecting military authority. "Mr. Davis," Rodriguez said, turning his attention to the civilian security contractor whose behavior had been equally inappropriate. "Your conduct this morning demonstrates serious deficiencies in your understanding of military protocol and proper security procedures." Davis finally found his voice, stammering as he attempted to explain his actions to senior leadership who had already witnessed the results of his professional judgment. "I was just following standard procedures for unidentified personnel, Sergeant Major." Rodriguez's expression hardened further as he processed Davis's explanation, recognizing it as exactly the kind of flawed thinking that had created the morning's catastrophic situation. Standard procedures required competent evaluation, not predetermined harassment. "Your security clearance and base access are suspended immediately," Rodriguez announced, his words sealing Davis's fate with bureaucratic efficiency. "You will be escorted from the installation pending a complete review of your qualifications and conduct." General Reyes stepped forward, her command presence fully evident as she prepared to address the gathered personnel who had witnessed the morning's unprecedented breakdown of military discipline. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to leading large organizations through difficult situations. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, ensuring her words would reach every person in the reception area and beyond. "This morning's events demonstrate the critical importance of treating all personnel with appropriate military courtesy and respect regardless of their appearance or your assumptions about their role." Her measured tone and professional bearing commanded attention from everyone present, transforming the chaotic aftermath of confrontation into a teaching moment about leadership expectations and military values. The witnesses understood they were receiving guidance that would shape their future behavior. Military bearing and professional courtesy are not optional standards that apply only when convenient, she continued, her gaze moving systematically around the room to make eye contact with multiple personnel. "They are fundamental requirements that define our character as military professionals." Sergeant Major Rodriguez stepped beside her, his stern expression reinforcing the seriousness of her message while demonstrating the unity of senior leadership in addressing the breakdown of discipline. His presence reminded everyone that enforcement of standards would be thorough and uncompromising. Effective immediately, all administrative personnel will undergo mandatory retraining in military courtesy, proper identification procedures, and chain of command respect, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the building. "This training will be conducted under direct senior non-commissioned officer supervision." Colonel Harris consulted his watch and nodded to indicate that additional consequences would be implemented throughout the day as word of the incident spread across the installation. The change of command ceremony would proceed, but the morning's lessons would resonate far beyond this single building. Each individual who participated in this morning's harassment will provide written statements detailing their actions and acknowledging their failures in military judgment, Harris declared, his tone indicating that accountability would be thorough and documented. These statements will become part of their permanent records. Morrison's hands trembled as he realized that his military career had been fundamentally altered by his morning's entertainment at the expense of a general officer. The confident specialist who had mocked her credentials now faced professional consequences that could follow him for years. Additionally, formal letters of apology will be required from each participant, Rodriguez added, ensuring that personal accountability accompanied administrative consequences. These letters will demonstrate understanding of proper military courtesy and respect for commissioned officers. Tanner and Ricks stood in stunned silence. Their aggressive morning behavior transformed into evidence that would be evaluated by military justice officials trained to assess violations of officer respect and assault charges. Their careers hung in the balance of decisions they had made during moments of assumed authority. New protocols will be established immediately for all personnel interactions in this building, General Reyes announced, her command voice ensuring that changes would be implemented regardless of individual preferences or past practices. Every person entering this facility will be treated with appropriate military courtesy until proper identification and assistance can be provided. The ripple effects of the morning's consequences began spreading throughout Fort Alder as senior non-commissioned officers received word of the disciplinary actions and training requirements. The installation's culture was experiencing immediate adjustment under new leadership expectations. Rodriguez assigned Master Sergeant Williams to assume direct oversight of the administrative section, ensuring that proper military standards would be maintained while the involved personnel underwent retraining and disciplinary processing. The senior NCO's reputation for strict adherence to protocol made him ideal for restoring professional behavior. Staff Sergeant Chun will conduct daily inspections of military courtesy and personnel interaction protocols, Rodriguez continued, establishing multiple layers of oversight to prevent future breakdowns in discipline. These inspections will continue until proper standards are consistently demonstrated. Colonel Harris prepared to escort General Reyes to the command suite for the formal ceremony proceedings, but paused to deliver additional guidance to the gathered personnel who would carry word of the morning's lessons throughout the installation. Let this morning's events serve as a clear reminder that military courtesy and respect for authority are not negotiable standards, Harris declared, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the importance of leadership consistency. Every interaction reflects on our installation's professional character and mission readiness. The witnesses began dispersing slowly, understanding that they had observed a defining moment in the installation's culture and leadership expectations. Word would spread quickly about the consequences of disrespecting authority and the importance of proper military bearing. General Reyes straightened her uniform and prepared for the formal change of command ceremony. But her initial assessment of installation culture had already provided valuable insights about areas requiring immediate attention and improvement under her leadership. The administrative building settled into subdued activity as the immediate consequences took effect, and personnel processed the morning's dramatic demonstration of military justice and leadership accountability. Professional standards had been restored, but the work of cultural transformation was just beginning. Rodriguez completed his final documentation while observing the behavioral changes already evident among personnel who remained in the reception area. The swift implementation of consequences had sent clear messages about expectations and accountability under the new command structure. Master Sergeant Williams arrived to assume his oversight responsibilities, his presence immediately noticeable as administrative personnel adjusted their behavior to reflect proper military bearing and courtesy. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable to experienced eyes. The morning sun continued climbing toward its zenith as Fort Alder began adapting to new leadership expectations and the consequences of testing military authority without proper respect for rank and position. General Reyes had established her command presence through patient endurance followed by swift justice. The formal change of command ceremony proceeded with military precision in Fort Alder's main parade ground, where hundreds of soldiers stood in perfect formation under the climbing sun. General Reyes received the installation colors from Colonel Harris with the dignity befitting the occasion, but her mind carried the lessons of the morning's events into her new command responsibilities. As the ceremony concluded and personnel dispersed to their duties, the administrative building began its transformation under new leadership expectations. Master Sergeant Williams had already implemented immediate changes to ensure proper military courtesy would be demonstrated by every member of the administrative staff. The reception desk operated with renewed professionalism as personnel processed the morning's consequences and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Morrison moved with careful precision, his confident mockery replaced by nervous attention to proper procedures and respectful interaction with all visitors. General Reyes returned to the administrative building 3 hours after the ceremony, her command presence unmistakable as she entered the reception area where the morning's confrontation had taken place. The atmosphere had been completely transformed by senior non-commissioned officer oversight and the implementation of new protocols. "Good afternoon, General," Morrison announced immediately upon seeing her, his voice carrying appropriate military courtesy as he rendered a proper greeting. "How may we assist you today with your administrative requirements?" The transformation was remarkable and immediate, demonstrating how quickly military behavior could be corrected when proper leadership standards were enforced consistently. Williams observed from his supervisory position, ensuring that courtesy and respect were maintained throughout all interactions. General Reyes requested individual meetings with each person who had participated in the morning's harassment, understanding that effective leadership required addressing failures directly while providing opportunities for professional growth and redemption. Specialist Morrison reported to her temporary office with the subdued bearing of someone who understood the gravity of his situation. His confident demeanor had been replaced by genuine remorse and awareness of how completely his judgment had failed during the morning's events. "Morrison," she began, her tone professional but not hostile, "this morning's incident reflects serious gaps in your understanding of military courtesy and proper personnel identification procedures. Your behavior toward a commissioned officer was completely unacceptable." Morrison stood at attention, his eyes focused straight ahead as he processed her words and the reality of his situation. "Yes, ma'am, General. I take full responsibility for my actions and understand that my behavior failed to meet military standards." His response demonstrated genuine understanding rather than defensive justification, suggesting that the consequences had achieved their intended effect of teaching proper respect for authority and military protocol. General Reyes appreciated accountability when it was genuine. "You will complete 40 hours of additional training in military courtesy, personnel identification procedures, and proper interaction protocols," she announced, outlining consequences designed to address his specific failures while providing opportunity for professional development. Corporal Ricks entered next, his aggressive morning behavior transformed into nervous respect as he faced the officer he had physically threatened and attempted to intimidate. His understanding of military hierarchy had been fundamentally corrected by the swift consequences of his actions. "Ricks, your conduct this morning included physical intimidation and interference with a commissioned officer performing official duties," she stated clearly, ensuring he understood the specific nature of his violations. "This behavior violates multiple articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." His face reflected genuine fear as he processed the implications of assault charges against a general officer, understanding that his military career hung in the balance of decisions made during moments of assumed authority over someone he had completely misjudged. "Ma'am, I deeply regret my actions and accept full responsibility for my failure to demonstrate proper military courtesy and respect," Ricks replied, his voice barely audible as he struggled with the magnitude of his situation. Specialist Tanner's meeting reflected similar themes of accountability and professional development, though his theatrical demands to examine classified documents had created additional security violations that would require more extensive corrective action and training. Each meeting reinforced General Reyes's command philosophy of holding personnel accountable while providing opportunities for growth and improvement. Military justice served both punishment and educational functions when properly implemented by competent leadership. The afternoon brought implementation of new administrative protocols designed to ensure respectful treatment of all personnel regardless of their appearance or presumed status. Williams supervised the posting of updated procedures that emphasized courtesy and proper identification processes. Staff Sergeant Chun conducted the first of his mandated daily inspections, observing personnel interactions and ensuring that military bearing and courtesy were consistently demonstrated. His presence served as constant reminder that professional standards were being actively monitored and enforced. By evening, the administrative building operated with dramatically improved professionalism as personnel adjusted to new expectations and oversight. The transformation demonstrated how quickly military culture could be corrected when leadership standards were clearly communicated and consistently enforced. General Reyes addressed the entire administrative staff during their closing formation, using the opportunity to establish her command philosophy and expectations for future performance. Her words would guide their behavior throughout her tenure as installation commander. "Military courtesy and respect for all personnel are fundamental requirements that define our character as professionals," she announced, her voice carrying to every member of the formation. "These standards apply regardless of a person's appearance, assumed status, or your personal opinions about their role." The personnel listened with attention that had been completely absent during the morning's harassment, understanding that their new commander expected excellence in all interactions and would enforce standards consistently throughout the installation. Treating people with dignity and respect isn't just military protocol, she continued, her message extending beyond immediate regulations to encompass broader principles of professional behavior and human decency. It reflects our values as military professionals and our commitment to mission accomplishment through teamwork. I want to ask those of you watching this to think about first impressions and how we judge people based on appearance. Have you ever made assumptions about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments about respect and the importance of treating everyone with dignity regardless of how they look. Her integration of broader lessons demonstrated leadership that extended beyond immediate discipline to encompass character development and personal growth. Military service provided opportunities to learn values that transcended professional requirements. The administrative section's transformation became a model for installation-wide cultural improvement as word spread about the morning's events and their swift resolution through proper leadership and accountability. Other sections began examining their own standards and procedures. Rodriguez conducted follow-up assessments throughout the week, documenting improvements in military courtesy and personnel interaction across multiple departments. The ripple effects of consistent standard enforcement spread throughout Fort Alder's entire command structure. Morrison's behavior reflected genuine professional growth as he completed his additional training and demonstrated consistent military courtesy in all interactions. His experience served as a powerful example of how accountability could produce positive behavioral change when properly implemented. Ricks and Tanner faced more extensive consequences due to the serious nature of their physical interference with a commissioned officer, but both were provided opportunities for professional development and redemption through intensive retraining and supervised duty. The security contractor position previously held by Davis was filled by a candidate with extensive military experience and proper understanding of protocol for identifying and assisting all personnel. Background checks and training requirements were enhanced to prevent similar failures. 3 months later, the administrative building operated as a model of military professionalism and courtesy, with personnel consistently demonstrating respect for all visitors and proper identification procedures. The transformation had become permanent through consistent leadership and oversight. General Reyes's command tenure began with clear establishment of expectations that extended far beyond the administrative section to encompass installation-wide cultural standards. Her patient endurance of harassment followed by swift justice had demonstrated effective leadership principles. The morning's lessons about assumptions, respect, and proper military bearing became part of installation folklore, reminding personnel that true authority often came in unexpected packages and that professional courtesy was never optional regardless of circumstances. Fort Alder thrived under leadership that valued dignity, respect, and proper military protocol while maintaining high standards for all personnel. The administrative building served as daily reminder that first impressions could be dangerously misleading and that treating everyone with courtesy was both professional requirement and moral imperative. Years later, personnel who witnessed the morning's events continued sharing the story as a powerful example of how assumptions about appearance could lead to catastrophic errors in judgment. The lesson resonated across military installations wherever respect for authority and human dignity remained fundamental values. General Reyes's leadership philosophy, forged through patient endurance and tested by harassment, established lasting cultural changes that improved Fort Alder's mission effectiveness through enhanced professionalism and mutual respect among all personnel regardless of rank or position. The transformation of the administrative section from a source of institutional embarrassment to a model of military excellence demonstrated how effective leadership could produce rapid and lasting behavioral change when standards were clearly communicated and consistently enforced through appropriate consequences and opportunities for growth.